The sun was now high, and it shone down through the half-stripped branches of the trees, and lit the clearing with bright patches of light. They halted suddenly on the edge and peered through the tree trunks, holding their breath. There stood the trolls, 3 large trolls. One was stooping, and the other 2 stood staring at him. Strider walked forward unconcernedly. "Get up, old stone," he said, and broke his stick upon the stooping troll. Nothing happened. There was a gasp of astonishment from the hobbits, and then even Frodo laughed. "Well," he said, "we are forgetting a family history. These must be the very 3 that were caught by Gandalf quarrelling over the right way to cook 13 dwarves and 1 hobbit." "I had no idea we were anywhere near the place," said Pippin. He knew the story well. Bilbo and Frodo had told it often, but as a matter of fact, he had never more than half believed it. Even now, he looked at the stone trolls with suspicion, wondering if some magic might not suddenly bring them to life again. "You're forgetting not only your family history, but all you ever knew about trolls," said Strider. "It is broad daylight with a bright sun, and yet you come back trying to scare me with a tale of live trolls waiting for us in this glade. In any case, you might have noticed that one of them has an old bird's nest behind his ear. That would be a most unusual ornament for a live troll." They all laughed. Frodo felt his spirits reviving. The reminder of Bilbo's first successful adventure was heartening. The sun, too, was warm and comforting, and the mist before his eyes seemed to be lifting a little. They rested for some time in the glade and took their midday meal right under the shadow of the troll's large legs. "Won't somebody give us a bit of a song while the sun is high?" said Merry when they had finished. "We haven't had a song or a tale for days." "Not since Weathertop," said Frodo. The others looked at him. "Don't worry about me," he added. "I feel much better, but I don't think I could sing. Perhaps Sam could dig something out of his memory." "Come on, Sam," said Merry. "There's more stored in your head than you let on about." "I don't know about that," said Sam, "but how would this suit? It ain't what I call proper poetry, if you understand me, just a bit of nonsense. But these old images here brought it to my mind." Standing up, with his hands behind his back, as if he was at school, he began to sing to an old tune. "Troll sat alone on his seat of stone and munched and mumbled a bare old bone. For many a year he had gnawed it near, for meat was hard to come by. Down by, in a cave in the hills he dwelt alone, and meat was hard to come by. Up came Troll with his big boots on. Said he to Troll, 'Pray, what is yon? For it looks like the shin of mine uncle Tim. I should be lying in a graveyard, paveyard. 'Tis many a year has Tim been gone, and I thought you were lying in a graveyard.'" Johnny. "My lad," said Troll, "'tis this bone I stole, but what be bones that lie in a hole? Thine uncle was dead as a lamb bled, before I found his shin bone. Tin bone, thin bone, he can spare a share for a poor old troll, for he don't need his shin bone." Said Tom, "I don't see why the likes of thee, without accidentally should go making free with the shack or the shin of my father's tin. So hand the old bone over, rover, trover. Though dead he be, it belongs to me. So hand the old bone over. For a couple of pins, says Troll and grins, I'll eat thee too, and gnaw thy shins. A bit of fresh meat will go down sweet. I'll try my teeth on thee now. See now. I'm tired of gnawing on bones and skins. I've a mind to dine on thee now. But just as he thought his dinner was scored, he found his hands as cold of gnawed. Before he did mind, Tom slipped behind and gave him the boot to larn him. Warn him, darn him. A bump of the boot on the seat on board would be the way to larn him. But harder than stone is the flesh and bone of a troll that sits in the hills alone. As well set your root to the mountain's root, for the seed of a troll don't feel it. Heal it. Old Troll laughed when he heard Tom groan, and he knew his toes could feel it. Tom's leg is gay since Tolkien came, and his Douglas foot is lasting lame. But the troll don't care, and he's still there, with a bone he bought from his owner. Donor. Troll's old seat is still the same, and the bone he bought from his owner. That's a warning to us all. It's as well use the stick and not your hand, Strider. Well, where did you come by that, Sam? Asked Pippin. I've never heard those words before. Sam muttered something inaudible. It's out of his own head, of course, said Frodo. I'm learning a lot about Sam Gamgee on this journey. First, he was a conspirator, now he's a jester. He'll end up by becoming a wizard or a warrior. I hope not, said Sam. I don't know neither. We are, of course, in The Lord of the Rings, in the Fellowship of the Ring. We're specifically in the last chapter of Book 1, Chapter 12, Flight to the Ford. Up until this point, we've had a good few songs by hobbits, but only a handful more, actually, will appear in the remainder of The Lord of the Rings. Frodo has already been wounded at Weathertop, we're well out of the Shire, and things are getting darker and more serious. The dreaded Black Riders will appear again very soon after this scene, more dangerous than ever. And yet, Sam Gamgee has the gusto and creative spirit to invent impromptu and very funny lyrics for an old tune, adapting the subject matter for the occasion, the spot of Bilbo's earlier adventure in The Hobbit, in the shape of the three trolls now turned into stone. Now, I'm fully aware I'm addressing the Tolkien Society and no random audience, so most of you in this room will know that Tolkien did not invent this song just for Sam, and only when he got to that point of writing The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien was a great recycler. He first wrote what became the Stone Troll in the 1920s. The first version, the earliest version, was called Pero et Codex, which is Latin for boot and bottom, i.e. the human boot that kicked the troll's very hard bottom, revised as the root of the boot. It was under this latter title that it was included with other poems by Tolkien and his colleague Evie Gordon in Songs for the Philologists, originally composed when both of them were at Leeds. I was actually holding the manuscript of the root of the boot in my hand at the University of Leeds Special Collections about a month ago. The root of the boot is very close to Sam's song. It's nearly, you could follow it, you know, the story is the same, but there are some subtle differences. There are more dialect words in the root of the boot, and more religious references, actually, notably to heaven and hell. And these are two verses that are significant. I'll explain in a minute why. So this is a slightly different one to the bit about, you know, you shouldn't mind about the bone. Young man, says the troll, that bone I stole, but what be bones when mayhap the soul in heaven on high hath an aureole as big as bright as a bonfire, on fire, yon fire, etc. So the troll seems to be saying in a very Christian-spirited fashion that Tom shouldn't worry about the body of his dead uncle. What really matters is the soul, which is now up in heaven, surrounded by an aureole, by a bright halo. So munching old Jones' old bone is neither here nor there. However, says Tom od Steve, 'tis my belief, if bonfire there be, 'tis underneath. For old man John was as proper as ever wore black on a Sunday, grand day, Monday, etc. So clearly old man John was no saint with a halo. The only bright thing about him are the flames of hell roasting him. And of course Grandy Monday is a reference to the nursery rhyme, Solomon Grundy, born on Monday, christened on Tuesday, married on Wednesday, etc. I won't say the whole thing. Christopher Tolkien actually has said that his father was extremely fond of the troll song and that he remembered his father singing it, adding that his delight in this particular line, if bonfire there beat is underneath, is among his earliest recollections from his father. So Sam isn't just singing to an old tune, he's literally reusing an old song by Tolkien. But the old tune itself is also recycled. It is a real old tune from an old folk song, and there are variations. You might have heard it in different versions. I'm using the version that Tolkien has sang. Most people know it as The Fox Went Out, or The Fox and the Goose, or just The Fox. And it begins, the fox went out on a chilly night, he prayed to the moon to give him light, going many a mile to go that night, before he reached the town, oh, town, oh, town, oh, yet many a mile to go that night,
Now he reached the town, oh.
So the story tells us that of a fox out at night to steal his dinner from the nearby town. The fox reaches the farmer's yard and seizes a goose. In some versions it seizes a duck, you know, there's variations, by the neck. And the quacking of the goose or duck wakes the old woman in the farm who alerts the farmer. But too late. By the time the farmer has blown his horn, the fox is far away and comfortably reaches his cozy den, where his 10 little cubs are waiting. And then the fox, his wife, and the little cubs have the meal of their lives at the expense of the farmer. And if the story reminds you a bit of Roald Dahl's fantastic Mr. Fox, it's because they're part of the same tradition. You know, this is material that goes back a long time. The Fox is a very popular folk song indeed, collected widely in England, often in Devonshire and Cornwall, but by no means just there, but with versions also known in Scotland, and a long history of transmission actually in North America, in the north from New England to Iowa, and in the south from North Carolina to Missouri. There's numerous collected versions. There are variations on the lyrics, but the main story, certain descriptive terms, the meter and the repetitions, and some specific terms of phrasing remain the same. But how old is this old folk song? Why did it attract Tolkien's attention? Is it just, it's addictive and memorable tune, and I think you will get out of here with an earworm, and I apologize for that, but it gets stuck in your head, it does. Or is it its subject matter, or is it really its age and provenance? Well, in 1952, two scholars published their respective editions of a 15th century Middle English poem found in a manuscript in the British Museum, conventionally called The Fox and the Goose. The first scholar was Russell Hope Robbins in his secular lyrics of the 14th and 15th centuries. The second one was R.H. Bowers in the Journal of English and German Philology. The poem begins like this. Pax vobis quod the fox, for I'm coming to Tuna. It fell against the next nicht, the fox get to with all his micht, with uden kolo candelicht, one that he come to Tuna. And you can see the meter already, right? The story is the same, the meter is the same, even some terms of phrase again are the same. And if I try, I could actually sing this exactly the same way as the stone troll at the moment. Shall we have go at the Middle English one? Yes. The first two lines clearly, we're missing the head of that stanza, so we're starting from it fell against. Okay? It fell against the next nicht, the fox into with all his might. We didn't call or candelicht, but then he called to Tuna, Tuna, Tuna. We didn't call or candelicht, one that he called to Tuna. I can say you sang in Middle English now. Okay. So Bowers himself, the editor in the Journal of English and German Philology, pointed straight away to the similarities between the Middle English poem with The Fox Went Out, while in 1961 George Perkins wrote a definitive article that proved that the Middle English poem is indeed the ancestor of this folk song. The Middle English poem is written in the dialect of the East Midlands. Of course it goes on and on, right? I'm just giving you the opening here. The poem is written in the dialect of the East Midlands with perhaps some northern influences. The manuscript is dated within 25 years either way of 1500. As Robbins, although probably it's existed long before that. As Robbins notes, it would have been a very popular song, and it is one, quote, of the songs which would be sung at popular gatherings, in the hall, in the inn, or on the green, or on the road, unquote. It's clearly incomplete, as you see it's missing its beginning there, its opening. It contains a number of irregularities and archaisms, and therefore it seems to have been remembered with some omissions from oral tradition. It could well be 100 years older than the manuscript, it could be older than that yet, but it's very difficult to pin down how far we can go. Now, all of these three publications, the two editions of the poem and the article that proved the link, are a bit late for the root of the boot, really, which, as I said earlier, was first composed in the 1920s. But Tolkien may have well known the manuscript, which wasn't, clearly was around for a long time before and listed in earlier publications. And in any case, I have my bet is that he had an inkling that this is an older song that goes back a long way. And there were definitely, that it was definitely older than the 19th century folklore collecting efforts. And definitely versions or extracts were actually printed a good few times in the very early 19th century, before the big rise of the folklore movement. So first there's an extract in 1801 in Gamma Gurdon's Garland on the Nursery Parnassus by Joseph Ritson, which only preserved the stanza with a woman in the farm sort of alerts the farmer. Old Mother Whittle Waddle jumped out of bed and out of the... Okay, let's sing this as well. Old Mother Whittle Waddle jumped out of bed and out of the case, she put out her head, cried the house is on fire, their great big sister, and the foxes come to town, oh, town, oh, town, oh. Cried the house is on fire, their great big sister, and the foxes come to town, oh. And in 1826, Sir Walter Scott knew a version which began, and I won't dare pronounce the Scots, but Lynn will do it for me.
I hope. Eh, cod a toad, it's a brawl like net. The wind's in the west and the moon shines bright. The wind's in the west and the moon shines bright, and all away to the tune o'.
Todd, of course, is the Scottish common word for a fox. You know, we still have Mr. Todd in several stories where the foxes are bad. So. There's also evidence to suggest, actually, that the fox, which, as I said, was also known in North America, was at least known since the Civil War. You know, that's how far back our records go. So it's had a long history there too. So, as I said, Tolkien may have known the manuscript of the Middle English poem, but he must have also recognized the resonances of this later folk song with the medieval tradition of the cunning fox as a folk song and folktale character. So as far as medieval foxes go, I'm sure that the figure most of you would be familiar with is Reynard the Fox. The anthropomorphic trickster fox, who became so popular in medieval Europe, and we're talking about versions in Dutch and English and French and German, so it became so popular that Renard became the standard French word for fox, replacing the Old French houpial. Reynard's adventures involved him deceiving other anthropomorphic animals for his own benefit and trying to avoid their attempts at retaliation. He eludes capture and justice, he always manages to turn every situation to his own advantage, and he survives against all odds through sheer cleverness and cunning. He is a typical popular culture subversive hero, not at all heroic or noble, but most certainly triumphant at the end of every story. Now, Reynard is mentioned in all fairy stories. Tolkien mentions him at the point where he deals with beast fables, a genre which he argues has some connection with fairy stories, but is not really fairy story proper, because, as Tolkien explains, the animal form is only a mask upon a human face. Two names from the Reynard cycle crop up elsewhere in the Legendarium. Both of those names actually are names of antagonists or rivals of the clever fox. So in the Book of Lost Tales, we have Tevildo, the Prince of Cats, a character who later evolved to become Sauron, of all people. He also bears the name Tibbert, clearly an allusion to Tibbert the cat in the Reynard stories. He crops up in Tibbert Prince of Cats crops up in Shakespeare as well. And also we've got the three thanes of the Shire. Isengrim took the first, the second and the third. The second is the important one, he started the smiles and all that, who bear the name of Isengrim the Wolf, the main enemy and victim of Reynard the Fox. And Tolkien himself explained this in his guide to the names in The Lord of the Rings, where he says that the name is an old Germanic one, perhaps best known now as the name adopted for the wolf, as a character in the romance of Reynard the Fox. So he's very fully aware of the resonances there. We also know, though it remains unpublished, that in the 1920s Tolkien wrote a poem titled Reginhald is the Fox. So he had a go at the Reynard tradition. Reginhaldus is the Germanic original of Reynard. This poem, Reginhaldus the Fox, was sitting alongside three other poems inspired by medieval bestiaries. Oliphant, which you all know because it ended up in The Lord of the Rings. Fastetokeland, which most of you will know because it ended up in the Tales and the Adventures of Tom Bombadil. And one other that also remains unpublished, which is Monoceros the Unicorn. So we haven't seen two of those. Tolkien was also aware of other medieval foxes. So in the 1950s, he was appointed to supervise G.O.G. Evans of St. Hugh's College as a B.Lit student working on a thesis on an edition of the fable of the Fox and the Wolf from manuscript Digby 86. This is a 13th century story of a fox. He's called Reynard at least once in the manuscript, who fails to outwit a rooster but manages to fool a wolf. It's the same inventory of characters, really. Tolkien would have also been familiar with the fox in the Anchor and a Whistle, which is a text he edited and knew very, very well. And in the Anchor and a Whistle, different sins are equated with different animals, and the fox stands for covetousness. Also, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight has a famous fox hunt scene. In this case, the fox doesn't fare very well, I'm afraid. Things go pretty badly for him. Tolkien actually wrote in a letter to Naomi Mitchinson about, guess what, an overdue lecture he had to write. That I composed it with all the woe in the world, as the Gawain poet says of the wretched fox with the house on his tail. Yeah, I can completely sympathize with it. It happens all the time. He also used another medieval fox as an analogy. Bit of an interesting one, this. Referring to, when he was writing to his publishers, but he was referring to the Ace paperback controversy in the USA, right? The illegal paperbacks of The Lord of the Rings, etc. He actually compared Donald A. Wollheim of Ace Books to Dan Russell, the wily fox in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, in the Duns Squeeze Tales specifically. So this is what he's writing in this is in Wayne and Christina's chronology. We're very lucky to have this bit. I trust that I do not sound too cordial in my final reply to Wollheim, he says to his publishers. I had agreed to be amicable but not juicy. His letter is so comically reminiscent of Dan Russell, that's the fox, to Chanticleer, that's the rooster in that story. Come down and I will tell thee what I meant. Come here and I'll tell you what I mean. He could of course have approached me from the beginning with his flatter, but he's not quite as clever as the fox. The fox actually has had a long legendary career in literary and popular culture, from antiquity to modern folklore. For Aristotle, the fox is associated with the primordial and threatening powers of the earth, because it hides in burrows and eludes empirical observation. It is wicked through and through. For Lucretius, the fox is deceitful and beguiling, combining wickedness with cunning. Actually, a lot of the authors in antiquity compare the fox to the sophists, you know, for those of you that know your Greek philosophy. Christian texts and iconography condemned the fox as evil. The 2nd century Physiologus, which again Tolkien knew quite well, compares the fox with the devil. There's also this anecdote that the fox feigns dead, it pretends it's dead, and then other animals come close and then it just jumps and catches them. But by the time the Reynard the Fox cycle of stories was developing in the later Middle Ages, the tradition had actually diverged into 2 separate strands. So we have the canonical Christian interpretation of the fox as devilish, corrupting, and evil. And there are numerous medieval depictions like these ones here of the fox dressed as a priest, luring an innocent congregation of ducks and geese to their death. It's a clear warning for the faithful of the devil's wiles, really here. Actually, I think this tradition goes a long, long time. It continues in nursery rhymes. I knew a story in modern Greek from my grandfather of that, you know, the nun fox. And we also, so that's the one strand, the evil fox. But we also have the strand of the secular and far more popular celebration of the fox as a survivor, via pure cleverness. Which, yes, okay, cleverness that may cross into deceit, theft, being economical with the truth, different degrees of criminal activity, but which at the end acknowledges subversion and breaking the rules as a way to get by in a largely unjust society. So this ambivalent position of the fox, both wicked and somehow admirable or praiseworthy, is actually very much mirrored in the bafflement this creature has caused to later scientific observation. The fox he's an interesting animal. It's a betwixt and between creature that has eluded easy and neat scientific classification. It is something actually in between a cat and a dog. It belongs to the canine family, it belongs to the canine family, but it has evolved cat-like morphological features. It's got whiskers that have tactile receptors or foot pads, or semi-retractile claws, and sort of luminous eyes. And also it has feline hunting strategy, so it pounces on its victims. And it's significant, and this, you know, these are the scientists really talking here. J.D. Henry's influential scientific study on red foxes is subtitled "The Cat-like Canine." While Martin Wallen's influential book on all aspects of foxes, from natural history to culture, repeats in different wording the statement, of all creatures, the fox seems to be the one whose most defining characteristic is ambiguity. And ambiguity, rather than consistency, is what we get from Tolkien's treatment of foxes. In his engagement with medieval foxes that I already discussed, we've seen Tolkien beating the hunted fox in Sir Gawain, or rather beating himself by the hunted fox in Sir Gawain, and simultaneously critiquing but also admiring the cunning of the fox in the nun priest's tale. This same ambivalent attitude continues in other uses of the fox in Tolkien's work. Gollum is twice compared to a fox in The Lord of the Rings. First by Aragorn in the Fellowship of the Ring, where Frodo tells him that he thinks he's seen Gollum. "Ah," said Aragorn, "so you know about a little footpad, do you? He padded after us all through Moria and right down to Nimrodal. Since we took to boat, he's been lying on a log and paddling with hands and feet. I've tried to catch him once or twice at night, but he's slyer than fox, and as slippery as a fish. I hope the river voyage would beat him, but he's too clever a waterman." And much later, Faramir uses the same comparison when he demands to know the aim of Frodo and Sam's journey. "Where is the third of your company?" "The third? Yes, the skulking fellow that we saw with his nose in the pool down yonder. He has an ill-favoured look. Some spy breed of orc, I guess, or a creature of theirs. But he gave us the slip by some fox trick." Now, in both of these cases, the fox analogy points to a creature that smacks of evil and deceit, but is also rather to be admired for its skillful elusiveness. We also know Tolkien used the figure of the fox in one of his earliest linguistic documents, the Book of the Foxrook, a small notebook in which he outlined a secret code composed in 1909, inspired, as we heard in a brilliant paper by Charles a few days ago, by his involvement in the scouting movement, and also, of course, his innate interest in linguistic invention. And in this notebook, Tolkien seems to be using elements of animalic, a language he learned from his cousins, Mary and Marjorie Ingleton, in that he equates a scout with a fox. So, Foxrook might mean scout code. Smith and Winehouse speculated that the choice of the fox to signify a scout may be referring to, quote, the fox's reputation as a woodland creature of proverbial cunning. The fox analogy here is positive, pointing to the skill with science and communication, knowledge of the woodland, all of these things. But it also allows for a hint of something that can potentially go wrong, stealthiness, secretiveness. I think that this long literary and folklore tradition of the fox as an ambiguous creature is part, at least, of the reason why the folk tune of the fox attracted new lyrics about a troll from Tolkien. Okay, now you'll tell me, wait a second, right, a troll is evil, right? Through and through, there is no ambiguity there. Well, let's have a think about this. The trolls in Hobbit certainly have cannibalistic desires. They plan to cook the dwarves and Bilbo, but you have to accept that they're not your typical villains. They are rather stupid, they're sources of a humorous note at that point in the text. And at the same time, the stone troll in Sam's song that we all sang at the beginning, well, he's not that bad really, is he? He just wants to gnaw on a dead man's bone, who, let's face it, doesn't really need that bone anymore. I suppose from a modern point of view, the stone troll is very much in the hipster tradition of using leftovers and discarded ingredients to create a sustainable meal. So it's only when Tom tries to poke him, or rather kick his bottom, and is morally pedantic, the Tom's logic is that theft is theft, whether the owner needs, the bone or not. It's only then that the troll threatens Tom, but he still doesn't quite action his threat. And as my PhD student Penny Holdaway, who should be somewhere here in the room, reminds me all the time, Tolkien has at least one wholly sympathetic troll in his corpus, and that's the troll in The Bumpus, later revised and included in The Adventure of Tom Bombadil as Perry the Winkle, which features a lonely troll with exceptional baking skills looking for a friend. So this is a lovely illustration of Perry the Winkle. It's by Norloff, whom I met on Twitter. You should check this out, it's really, really good. So if we think of both the fox in the folk song and the troll in Sam's song as creatures in ambivalent positions, I suppose, think about the fox, right? Whose side are we in the folk song? I think we're with the fox. He's got 10 cubs to feed, and we sort of relish the fact that he's deceiving the farmer. Anyway, so if we think about the fox and the troll as being in these ambivalent positions, then the resonances between the tune Sam uses and the lyrics he invents are stronger. Remember, it is an old tune, even in the Shire. I suspect that Tolkien means that the old Shire tune is actually the fox tune, that the fox is a real song in the Shire. Which makes things complicated if we now turn to yet one more time when Tolkien used the same tune, The Fox Went Out. Because this time we have no mere troll. This time the lyrics are about Grendel. So when Christopher Tolkien published his edition of his father's translation of Beowulf recently, he included also all sorts of other goodies with it. And he also gave us Tolkien's teaching notes, for one thing, on Beowulf. And in this extensive commentary on the poem, Tolkien is preoccupied with a number of thematic strands, one of which is how the poem combines historical elements with tradition, with folkloric motifs. Christopher, in his usual generosity, gave us one more text, Selwch Spell, Tolkien's attempt to reconstruct a folk tale that could have been the folkloric source in the composition of Beowulf, as we know it. What I was completely astonished by when the book came out was the last extra bit that Christopher offered us, 2 lays, which attempt to recast the story of Beowulf as a traditional folk ballad, so a long narrative folk song. And guess what? These 2 lays are also intended to be sung in the tune of The Fox Went Out. So let's have a go at the first one, because the second one is much longer, and I think I'm sort of exhausting your patience here. But I need you to join in again, and this time it's easier because the repetition is always Herod, which is the main form. Okay, let's have a go. Ready? Grendel came forth in the dead of night, the moon in his eyes shone glassy bright, as over the moors he strode in might, until he came to Herod. Herod, Herod, as over the moors he strode in might, until he came to Herod. Dark lay day, the windows shone wide, while he lurked and listened long, and he cursed the laughter and cursed the song, and the twanging harps of Herod, 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 and he cursed the laughter and cursed the song, and the twanging harps of Herod. King Hrothgar mourns upon his throne, for his lieges slain he mourns alone. But Grendel knows the flesh and bone of the 30 thanes of Herod, Herod, Herod. But Grendel knows the flesh and bone of the 30 thanes of Herod. A ship that sails like a winged swan, and the foam is white on the waters long, and on their stands with bright come on, and the winds are brought to Herod, 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 and on their stands with bright come on, and the winds are brought to Herod. On the pillars of their Beowulf slept, and Grendel the cruel to the dark hall crept. The door sprang back, and in he leapt, and grasped the god of Herod, Herod, Herod. The door sprang back, and in he leapt, and grasped the god of Herod. As there arose from his mountain lair, Beowulf wrestled with Grendel there, and his arm and claw and blade did tear, and his black blood spilled in Herod, 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 and his arm and claw and blade did tear, and his black blood spilled in Herod. O Ecgthe's son, and dying said, forbear to you my vanquished head. O hard and stony be thy deathbed, and a red fell for Herod, Herod, Herod. O hard and stony be thy deathbed, and a red fell for Herod. Then hard and stony must be the bed, where at last and Beowulf viewed the demon's head, and hung it high in Herod, Herod, Herod. And Beowulf viewed the demon's head, and hung it high in Herod. Sort of little movements, don't we? Okay. Mary the Meadmen had their board, and Hrothgar dealt his golden hoard, and many a jewel and horse and sword to Beowulf gave in Herod, 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 and many a jewel and horse and sword to Beowulf gave in Herod. The moon gleamed in through windows one, as Beowulf frankly looked thereon, and a light in the demon's eyes that shone amid the blaze of Herod, 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 and a light in the demon's eyes that shone amid the blaze of Herod. On the sails of a ship the sunlight smiled, its bosom gleaming gold was fine, and the wind blew loud and free and wild, and it left the land of Herod, 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 and the wind blew loud and free and wild, as it left the land of Herod. Voices followed from the sounding shore that blessed the Lord whose timbers bore, but that sail returned with a nevermore, and his fate was far from Herod, Herod, Herod. But the sail returned with a nevermore, and his
it was far from Harold.
Last two, you're doing very well.
The demon said in the hall did hang, and grim from the wall while minstrels sang. The flames let forth and red swords rang, and hushed for the hearts of Harold. Harold, Harold. The flames let forth and red swords rang, and hushed for the hearts of Harold. And late as the last one bore ahead, as he lay on a hard and stony bed, and venom burned him and he bled. Remember the light of Harold, Harold, Harold. And venom burned him and he bled. Remember the light of Harold.
Lovely, thanks. Should be in lots of curricula. It's a lovely, nice and memorable summary of the story of Beowulf, at least the first episode, Beowulf's clash with Grendel. Clearly the second layer that incorporates Grendel's mother, the idea is that the story accumulates as it goes on. The last two stanzas actually allude very briefly and rather cryptically, if you don't know the story, but I'm sure most of you do in here, the eventual destruction of Harold in the distant future of the storyline and the death of Beowulf. If you look at that last stanza, one hoar of head refers to the now old white-haired Beowulf who is lying dying from the dragon's venom and brings to mind the light of Harold. Something very lyrical, very moving about this. Now one could just say here that Tolkien had grown too fond of the tune of the fox and that he just reused it sort of out of habit, right? It's catchy, it's meter that has worked for him before, and it has the credentials of a folk song that has survived over many generations. So if you want to compose a hypothetical folk ballad about Beowulf, well, you can't go too wrong using it, can you? Or can you? Would we expect a more somber and melancholy tune for a ballad that ends with the final destruction of Harold and Beowulf's death? But on the other hand, isn't the repetition of Harold twice in every stanza a glorious way to celebrate this famous meat hall and perhaps make its destruction feel more poignant at the end? It's all rather complicated, isn't it? But I guess that's what the folk tradition is too, complicated. Folk songs sung in the 19th century can be shown to go back to the Middle Ages. Creatures that are condemned in ecclesiastical sources can be celebrated in folk tradition. Monstrous beings such as trolls and even Grendel can be treated in a comic or sympathetic way. And don't you tell me that we didn't crack a smile at the line, but Grendel gnawed the flesh and bone of the 30 things of Harold, right? This was a troll imagery straight away there. Grendel, of course, is not Tolkien's troll. He's not usually considered as ambiguous, but there is a school of thought there who, some scholars who claim that Grendel is to be pitied. He's an exile, he's a loner, he's jealous of the happiness of Harold. Perhaps a bit misunderstood. I don't know. It's not a mainstream view, but there we are. But also, Grendel. This is a bit of a stretch here, but just entertain this for a minute. Grendel has luminous eyes, as we saw. The lay opens with Grendel came forth in the dead of night, the moon in his eyes shone glassy bright. And in his translation, Tolkien writes that from his eyes stood forth most like to flame and holy light. So it's very tempting, and I am stretching it here, it's very tempting to link this to the luminous eyes of the fox as perhaps an unconscious chiming note between the subject matter of Grendel and the tune of the fox. What actually I find fascinating is that in all three sets of lyrics, right, we've got the fox, we've got the stone troll, we've got the Leo Beowulf. The antagonists, the fox, the troll and Grendel, sort of a win in the end. The fox gets the goose and escapes unscathed. The troll manages to make Troll's leg lame and continues to munch on the bone rather defiantly. And Grendel's curse seems to work in the end. The poem ends with the destruction of Harold and the death of Beowulf. But as I'm gradually coming towards the end, and yes, I am finishing in a minute, let's return to the Shire. I promised you a thoroughly vulpine talk, and vulpine might as well mean labyrinthine. The fox's burrows are underground labyrinths with multiple exits and dead ends. And so far I've taken you through turns and some dead ends of a metaphorical fox's burrow. But some of you will protest, and I know you will, so there you are. I haven't mentioned the fox. The fox you're waiting for. Fear not, it's coming. I've discussed in my previous work how book one, specifically book one of the Fellowship of the Ring, is particularly concerned with folklore, Hobbit folklore specifically. So the conception of the hobbits is very close indeed to the 19th century perception of the sort of people that usually transmit folklore. They're rustic, they're naive, they're mostly uneducated and simple-minded, and revel in telling amusing stories and singing traditional rhyming songs. And these songs are not about heroic legend, they're rather associated with everyday activities, like most folk songs are. For example, in the beginning of the Fellowship of the Rings, when Frodo, Sam and Pippin are on the way to Buckland, they start singing a drinking song. Ho, 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 to the bottle I go, to heal my heart and drown my woe. Later on, while they're taking a bath after arriving at Crickhollow, Pippin sings one of Bilbo's favourite bath songs, praising the delights of hot water, so the simple things really. In addition, some of the songs the hobbits sing are good examples of how folklore really works, by every singer changing and modifying traditional material for their own purposes. We were talking about adaptation, right? This is exactly what folklore does. For instance, consider the walking song that Frodo, Sam and Pippin sing again on the way to Buckland. Upon the hearth the fire is red, beneath the roof there is a bed. We're told that Bilbo Baggins had made the words to a tune, quote, that was as old as the hills and taught to Frodo. Also, when Merry and Pippin have convinced Frodo that they will go with him in his great adventure, they sing a farewell song, which, quote, they had apparently got ready for the occasion. It was made on the model of the dwarf song that started Bilbo on his adventure long ago, and went to the same tune. Farewell we call to hearth and hall, the wind may blow and rain may fall. So again, reusing tunes, inventing words on the spot for things that fit. And of course, even more impressively, as we saw at the very beginning of the talk, Sam Gamgee seems perfectly capable of creating an entire new set of lyrics for an old tune on the spot, based on what is around him. Impressed by the funny and metrical, intricate troll song, Pippin says, "Where did you come by that, Sam?" And Frodo says, "Out of his head, clearly." So, if we keep in mind how all of this first part of The Lord of the Rings is steeped in folkloric concepts and examples, if we recall Sam's use of the fox, the song, which may well have been a Shire folk song, and if we also bring to mind Tolkien's lifelong engagement with medieval foxes, the tradition of Reynard, then the presence of one of the most baffling characters in that same opening section of The Lord of the Rings may be a bit less inexplicable. So as Frodo, Sam and Pippin walk out of the Shire and towards Crickhollow, we find this much discussed scene. Just over the top of the hill they came on the path to Fairwood. Leaving the road, they went into the deep, resin-scented darkness of the trees and gathered dead sticks and coals to make a fire. Soon they had a merry crackle of flame at the foot of a large fir tree, and they sat round it for a while until they began to nod. Then, each in an angle of the great tree's roots, they curled up in their cloaks and blankets and were soon fast asleep. They set no watch. Even Frodo feared no danger yet, for they were still in the heart of the Shire. A few creatures came and looked at them when the fire had died away. A fox passing through the wood on business of his own stopped several minutes and sniffed. Hobbits? He thought. Well, what next? I've heard of strange doings in this land, but I've seldom heard of a hobbit sleeping out of doors under a tree. 3 of them. There's something mighty queer behind this. He was quite right, but he never found out any more about it. Now, critics have tried to accommodate the thinking, or perhaps even the talking fox, in various ways. Surely it's a remnant of the whimsy of the Hobbit, which does include the talking thrush, or a remnant of the traditional beast fables and talking animals in children's literature, which the Hobbit was, but the Lord of the Rings isn't, so Tolkien should have really got it out, but he didn't. That may be a solution, but Tolkien revised this part of the Lord of the Rings numerous times, and the fox remained. Why? Well, I put it to you that this fox, who is on its way to sort out business of his own, is actually fitting perfectly with this part of the story. Here is a representation of the fox, who is off to steal a goose for his little ones. The same fox of the folk song Sam uses, perhaps that's the business of his own, that's the same fox from the fox song. Or he's a representation of Reynard the fox, off to deceive one of his usual victims. Or the fox of the Gawain poet, who may not survive too long if he isn't careful. Or the fox of one of the other medieval texts Tolkien knew, a folkloric character, a character with a long pedigree in British tradition, a creature of ambivalent credentials, both clever but also tricksy, a liminal animal which crosses boundaries of natural classification, just as the 3 hobbits are crossing the boundary of the Shire and are heading towards the great unknown, off to meet another foxy character, Gollum. Is this thinking fox In this thinking fox, Tolkien creates a meeting point between his own world of Middle-earth and an entire folkloric tradition, and bridges the songs the hobbits have been singing so far with a real-world folk tune of the stone troll that Sam will sing in a couple of chapters. Folk poetry, folk singing, and a hint of something half familiar, half threatening at the thresholds of the Shire, just as the hobbits are heading towards the biggest adventures of their life. The fox may have never found out any more about it, but fortunately we do. Thank you.
To end on. Right, you've cleverly used up a lot of your question time by singing. I'm going to, because I can't walk around the front because of the cameras, I'm going to start this side of the room and go round. So I think Jessica, I'm going to move to the front.
When you mentioned the Grendel's glowing eyes and they connected it to the fox, obviously what I thought of was Gollum.
Yeah.
And again, it would fit. Gollum is clever. Arguably, in a way, he's sympathetic, obviously, the pity element. And he kind of wins. He gets what he wants in the end.
Sort of.
Sort of.
It's that sort of those liminal places again, isn't it? It's that nothing is clear-cut. And clearly people have connected Gollum with Grendel, but I think there is a longer line going there with luminous light. So thank you very much for that. Hey there, Jessica.
Just, first about the Ballad of Beowulf, I did put it in the book singing programme straight after the book was published, and I can bring it back. Question is, are you aware of What the Children Sing by Moffat, which was the immediate source of many of the tunes and words, and the fox went out in it, and I thought I'd given a copy.
Yeah, I know it from you.
Of this book, which was Edith's book, and has the tunes,
the exact
word, and this was the book he used for most of the songs of the apologists.
That's right. That's right. And I didn't say much about the tune. I only just very quickly. So lots of you will know the fox. It's still a song that is sung quite a lot, and you will know a slightly different tune. And I think the one that I don't know if you see online when the Leeds collection got the songs for the philologist manuscripts, they did a recording of the Stone Troll, but they used the wrong tune. It's not Tolkien's tune. Yeah. But this is again normal. In folklore, you'll have variations in the tune as you have variations in the word.
Right.
The image of the fake fox religious leader kind of taking the flock to an ominous end made me think of Lewis Carroll, The Walrus and the Carpenter, with the oysters following, and I wondered if you thought that was a similar kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long tradition of the animal disguising as something trustworthy, like a parent. Or, I mean, don't go too far. Red Riding Hood is that story again, isn't it? It's the wolf disguising as the grandmother, which goes back to a very, very old folk tale from Asia, probably with the tiger grandmother. So the idea of the evil animal disguising as something that trust, it's exactly that is the most condemning thing about the fox in the medieval Christian tradition, that you trust, the priest or the nun, and they're there to devour you. So yeah, it's a very, very long tradition.
Joel.
You mentioned the fox hunt in Gawain the Green Knight, and all I could think was that where that fox appears in The Lord of the Rings is just before the hobbits are themselves about to be hunted by the Black Riders. Is this a case of foreshadowing?
It's possible, it's possible. I think there are all of the foxes talking in some way come together in that particular moment. That's what I was trying to capture here. It doesn't have to be one of them. It can be, a multiplicity of traditional foxes really there. Yeah, thanks for that.
Hi, Dimitra. I've just always wondered about the narration in this episode. What on earth is going on? How did it end up in the Red Book of Westmarch when they were all asleep?
the answer. The Red Book of the Westminster has been copied, it has been transcribed a number of times. Some good scribe, possibly, building on this tradition, is adding this as a point of interest. Possibly adding some marginalia, etc. on it, some, maybe a picture.
When they said that Sam came up with the words to the 12 song on the spot, I don't remember, couldn't even come up with it earlier? Being Frodo's gardener, he would have a good chance of knowing the story about the stone trolls. So couldn't he have just come up with it years ago and decided to recite it then?
Yeah, you could very well have. You could have. What? I mean, it's complicated again because, as I said, this isn't a new song. Tolkien definitely didn't invent it for that particular point. But when does Sam sees trolls? I suppose there are traditional songs about trolls. There is the Bumpers, there is, Perry the Winkle, which in the Adventures of Tom Bombadil are described as part of the folklore repertoire of hobbits. Yeah, he could very well have invented it before. But again, that shows Sam as an active transmitter of tradition, somebody who is involved in modifying and changing lyrics to suit particular purposes. Thanks. Yeah.
Hello. Just a quick addition to the characteristic of the fox. I don't know how relevant this is, but in Japanese culture there is a kitsune, which is a shape-shifting creature which transforms itself from fox to human, and etc.
Absolutely. I've stuck to a Western tradition for obvious reasons, but the fox, there's a Native American folklore as well, Australian folklore. It just, but usually tends to be, again, ambiguous. It's that classification issue or the hiding away issue of the fox. Yeah.
Just want to add that those medieval illustrations of the preaching fox exactly illustrate a still existing Dutch proverb. When the fox preaches the passion, farmer, watch out for your chickens.
Yes, thank you for that. As I said, I think what those images, I was struck by those images, and this talk really came together in a very, very weird way because lots of different things came at different times, and then suddenly they all collided. I'm vividly, one of the few memories I have of my grandfather, because he died when I was very young, was reciting this poem about the nun fox who is eating the 3 roosters who are stupid enough to go and confess to her. Yeah.
The fox is also a creature of an archetypal trickster, and he appears like that in the Le Roman de Renard, and even in the New World, you can see its latest incarnation in cartoon of Wile E. Coyote.
And I suppose in modern culture, foxes are interesting because we have urban foxes. I think, again, that's an anecdote, it's neither here nor there, but one of the reasons why I decided finally, yes, I will talk about the fox and not another 3 things that I was thinking about, is because I was walking from my office in Glasgow to where I stay, and suddenly I hear a hiss. And it's like 10 o'clock at night or something like this because I stay stupidly late in my office. And it was a fox, an urban fox, who thought that I was, clearly, I was encroaching into its territory and hissed very, very loudly. And I suddenly thought, okay, the fox went out, and the moon was right there. So, okay, it's glimpsed now. I have to talk about it. Yeah.
I just wanted to politely disagree with the gentleman who just pointed out the trickster and the Wile E. Coyote, because the coyote is actually the trickster in the Native American mythology. So it's maybe a merging of the both tricksters, but I don't think that we can trace the fox.
Oh no, there's no direct line. No. But it's interesting that even if you have, again, this is the big argument, right? Tolkien was interested in that as well. Is folklore transmitted by diffusion or by spontaneous sort of same characteristics giving birth to the same sort of stories? And today we think it's probably a bit of both. Certain creatures and their morphology will give rise to similar-ish stories, but also good stories travel. And that's, some of them we can trace quite clearly how they travel.
In answer to the question of how did this bit of narrative get into the Red Book,
yes.
I think maybe perhaps one of the fox's young ones that it was out getting food for, having read an earlier version, perhaps wrote to the Middle-earth version and gave a very superior
roughly that same point.
I've always felt in this the shadow of the Hobbit sequel, with that breaking of the fourth wall that he does all the time in the Hobbit, and took out the Lord of the Rings, but it's still here in this one.
And it's there from the first drafts really, and didn't disappear.
Next, last question over here.
It's slightly different, but maybe it's been had before. Like obviously the word to learn them. Would that be obviously related to kind of Graham's Wind and the Willows, where Toad kind of says, you know, he wanted to learn the weasels, and then there's a big argument as to whether it's proper English or not. And Badger steps up and says that it sounds okay for Clever.
I think it's just a northern dialect word, really. Yeah. But again, it's interesting that we have another, you know, beast fable, sort of very classic children's literature text that uses the same word. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Dimitra.